Playbook for Performance, the official podcast of Shauna Corden, the Joan of Arc for corporate healing and performance. Join the quest to make work fun again by preparing leadership for engaging workplaces. And now, your host.
Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing well. So to continue with this month's theme about making the leader's life easier, we're going to talk about applications of coaching. So we've talked a little bit about the coaching conversation, how it differs from performance management, but there's a lot of ways that you can use coaching that will really help you out. And again, make your life so much easier, because instead of doing all the work or being the single brain for the entire staff, you're going to use that ask versus tell skill set in order to facilitate that. So let's get into it. So you probably are wondering, like, what can I apply coaching to? And basically anything that's not a safety protocol, anything that's not the rigors of like the SEC requirements or legalese, things like that, where you have to have a very prescribed process where you go through things just one by one in a particular order. ISO 9000, depending on how strictly you've written your procedures, it can be used for anything else. So a couple of things, like even in the hiring process, before you post that initial job posting, you can think about the qualities of potential candidates for hire. So one of my tenets is right person, and what I mean by that is they are a good fit culturally for the company. They share our values and they're on the same page. So that's number one. But you might also say, we could use a little more zip in our organization, or we want some more enthusiasm, or we need someone with deep experience in this particular area. Just using a coach to think out loud, to brainstorm some of those qualities, and then have the coach press on you to say, tell me more about why that's important. Cement this idea. How has it worked for you when you hired people who didn't have those qualities? Things like that. That's a great way to engage a coach or coaching for potential candidates for hire. Same thing with onboarding. Having a coach on board who can work with newly hired candidates that are different from their manager. So employees are often very reticent to ask their managers things like, when will I get a raise? Would it be okay if I took a vacation 2 weeks into my hire? Things like that. There needs to be someone who they can talk to, who they feel safe with, and they won't be judged. And a coach would probably ask questions like, well, what kind of message do you think that sends? What's the reasoning behind it? How could you frame it so that they understood that you were really committed to this role? Things like that. So there's a lot of organizations who attach coaching to the onboarding process. They often have an internal mentor, someone who kind of shows them the ropes and can shadow them, and vice versa. They have their manager, of course. They might have new employee orientation where they do their ergonomic setup and do all of that. And then there's this safe place to go. Usually it's about 3 months long, where they meet with a coach regularly just to get the lay of the land. The coach may or may not be super familiar with the company. If they're an internal person, they are, and they probably know some of the cultural in and outs. But if they're not, they can at least talk about what's happening in the industry as generalizations and help people figure out where they would look for that kind of information to answer those questions. In general, I'm always like, don't use coaching as a touchy-feely thing. That's a big mistake. It really is a tool to help solve business problems. So if you look at your business plan, most business plans are divided into 4 categories of reducing costs, increasing revenue, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. Each of those things you are going to have some big goals for, some hurdles, having a coach help analyze some of that, or question some of the assumptions, or challenge how they're doing things, the speed, the scope, things like that. That can be really helpful. In general, just overcoming obstacles. A lot of my wealth management clients, they have what they call these Monday meetings, where they're basically working through all their objectives and key results that they're trying to achieve. And anytime they run into a roadblock, they're going to bring it up at this Monday meeting. And coaching can be super helpful there. It's like, hey, we're supposed to schedule 40 client meetings this week. Tons of people are on vacation. We're only getting 30 so far. What can we do? It becomes sort of a brainstorm session, or group coaching or team coaching. That can be really, really helpful too. Options for development. So looking at individuals, I always like to create a development plan that is, one, who's your board of directors? Who are the experts that you're going to go to for all the facets of your job that you can go to with questions to say, what's appropriate for an expense report? How do I handle this leave request? Things like that. People that you can go to that you really trust. But in addition to that, in the 3 or 4 areas that they picked for the year that they want to improve their skills and get better, have a book, have a resource that you can shadow, someone who does it really well, but also have a coach. Think about what's your strategy to improve in this area. How are you going to get better? Sometimes the coach is someone you follow from afar, someone on YouTube. Sometimes there's someone that you meet with and you actually get coached by them. So there's some options there. A lot of organizations assign coaches to high potential candidates. This is basically what can they do to improve their leadership style, kind of address some of the challenges that they might have that are holding them back, really release the brakes when it comes to things, determining identity, habits, behaviors that'll help them out, and just really get them thinking about performing at that next level. What does it take for that? I think it's also really important in our diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions to think about, if we are going to be promoting diverse candidates, to make sure that they really shine. And so having that preparation, so when they step in the role, that they can be successful. So making sure that either development plans or training or anything that's needed there can really set them up for success. And then finally, this last topic, and there's a lot more topics that you can address coaching to, but of late, my latest book is about overcoming polarization, and that whole idea of seeking alignment. I'm over here, you're over here, how do we meet in the middle? And what is it that we need to do? How do we need to structure our conversations? Things like that. Those are all really important investments that are worthy of a coach. So coaching is really about solving business problems or innovating in your area. So, often working with distinguished technologists, lab people, that can be a great investment for coaching, especially if they're not as technically wired as the expert or the technical expert, because they can ask about some basic assumptions, or they can apply practices from other industries to say, well, what about this? I know they do this in the finance industry. Do they do this in tech? That kind of thing. So it really can be helpful to have someone who really knows nothing about what you do to help ask some basic questions about how you think and how that supports your goals. So don't think that the coach that you hire needs to be an expert in the field that you're in. Often it's an advantage if they're not. So why don't leaders use coaching more? Why don't you? Well, I think there is this perception that A, they need to be an expert. B, it's super expensive. I can't scale it for my organization. I don't know how to measure ROI. things like that when it comes to hiring their own coach. But why don't they use it more in terms of applying coaching skills to do their work? Well, sometimes they think, well, it undermines my authority and expertise if I ask questions instead of tell. I got promoted because I was the first among equals. I was the best engineer, or I was the best salesperson, or something like that. Well, they didn't necessarily promote you because you were the best at that. If that was true, they would have kept you in that role. And so learning to make that transition can be really helpful. But knowing that leading is different than giving advice is super important. So a lot of times leaders need to make that translation in their head to say, I'm no longer an engineer, I'm a leader of engineers. So I'm going to use this technique to help get more out of my people and do less work myself. Sometimes they think it doesn't produce results because if they're not in command and control mode, how do they ensure that results are produced? So that can be a fear. And sometimes people think it's just too touchy-feely, like they're like, oh, that's like Oprah. Well, Oprah does have some empathic qualities, that is true, and she's good at asking questions, but often, her agenda was let's get people to reveal these painful things or these intimate things. I think she's evolved since that time period, but the idea that it could be too touchy-feely, well, we don't have to get into that. We do want to look at the situations in terms of how you see the world and your context in that world. That's really important. But I don't need to know the backstory. A lot of times clients will start to get into this. They'll go, I know you feel like you might want to really give me this information, but it's not essential that I understand effectively coach you. So let's skip the story to see if we can achieve it without it. And often we do. So my encouragement for all of you is, as leaders, to make your life easier by getting trained in some of these coaching skills. These can be conducted in lunch and learn events, half-day workshops, full-day workshops, retreats. I do anything from like one-on-one training for people, but I also do workshops for teams, entire leadership teams, or high potential groups, because they are the next generation leaders and we want them to lead with that. It's really important to recognize that greatest generation, baby boomers, Gen X, they responded well to kind of a authoritarian command and control. They were quite happy to follow directions and go. Millennials really want more of a relationship-based leadership style. They want to have more consulting, counseling, coaching kind of relationships where there's a lot more dialogue that's going on as opposed to follow these directions. So do recognize that it's an asset that is going to help you with that part of your employee population in getting things done. So if you're watching us on YouTube, we would love for you to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends. Of course, if you're listening on any of your podcast platforms, same thing. If you can give us a 5-star review, things like that, it really helps us out so we can get the message out. And finally, I just want to remind people, if you are in the coaching community or HR community, I am going to be speaking at the International Coaching Federation Conference in Orlando, Florida in August. I just published an article about the topic I'm going to be talking about, Let's Not Break Up, about overcoming polarization and techniques that we can use as coaches, but also leaders who are not professional coaches, but employing a coach approach, about what they can do for people who are in that temptation of cutting off contact or polarizing. So if you have questions that I can help you out with, please drop a comment in our YouTube channel comments, or you can send an email to podcast@shaunacorden.com, and we'd be happy to address your questions in our next podcast. So thanks. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Playbook for Performance. To learn more about Shauna Corden, her consulting programs and tools, please visit her website at shaunacorden.com and follow us on social media at Shauna Corden.